I'm here with Minister Dre Gibbs, the youth minister of New Hampton Baptist Church. Minister Gibbs, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm blessed and highly favored. I'd like to start off today talking a little bit about you. Tell us about your calling. When did you feel compelled to pursue ministry?
Um, I believe I felt the first time I felt called was 12th grade of my senior year of high school, but I did not follow that plan that God had for me. I kept on the track of saying I was going to just go to Morehouse, and just follow whatever I um I felt like I needed to do. But then it happened again. My sophomore year of college, I started going back home working with the ministry department in my hometown church. And ever since my sophomore year, I've been in the church working for the Lord and using the youth department as a or not using the youth department, but me using my calling in the youth department.
So, have you faced any significant challenges, either personally or otherwise, since you first got involved in ministry?
Um, One challenge I faced back home was getting support from the older crowd who didn't want to see change in the youth department, although they are not youth. Um, they didn't want anything to change in that youth department. So that's one challenge that I faced and I had to overcome.
Hmm. So, can you describe a little bit how those challenges that you face have impacted the way that you approach your own ministry?
All right. Um, so I was the type of person who always go. I would always make sure that the elders in the church knew what was going on, although they didn't have anything to do with what I was doing in the youth department. I always wanted to make sure they knew what was going on. I didn't want to step on their toes. I didn't want to upset them. I didn't want to steer them away from the church. But now I don't do that anymore because I see it can cause problems. I can get more opinions from them, opinions that don't really matter, and I'll be up late at night worrying about what they said, how I can do this, how I can do that, when I could have just did what I was called to do, what God has already called me to do, without getting any approval from them since they're not over that area of the church.
Hmm. So, how have you balanced kind of this pursuit of ministry, getting involved, following your calling, while also embracing and being engaged with the experiences and challenges that come with being in your early 20s?
All right, so this year has been that's a great question for this time of year, right? Everything that's going on, COVID, racism, and church. That's been my three main things I've been dealing with um, from January up until July 16th. So balanced, I've brought all of that to the church, especially the racism part. I've called upon Christian leaders to step out and condemn racism, because if you don't condemn it, you condone it, and that's one thing I've been saying since the start of this race war that we're dealing with right now. And I've I've kind of turned the spiritual aspect not away from Jesus, but I've like put him into the race war, and I've been talking to people um, from a Christian standpoint on how to deal with race. So I've been doing those two jobs at the same time. So that's how I've been basically balancing those roles.
Hmm. Who have been some of the most influential people in your life as it relates to your ministry, and how have they impacted you?
All right. So my late great grandmother was my first spiritual person in my lifetime. She would rock me to sleep singing hymns. I didn't really understand what those hymns meant at that moment, but now in my lifetime, I really can just sit here and just talk a hymn, and every lyric in that hymn has given me guidance on how to deal with things. Her prayers are still being answered today, although she's not here. That's my great grandmother, and my two grandmothers. They are still living, and they are also praying women, and I appreciate them as well, for helping me learn how to pray and like what to pray for, how to seek guidance from Jesus, how to hear God's voice clearly. My mother, of course, she has given me spiritual advice And also, I don't want to say street advice, but advice that you wouldn't get from the spiritual side, but on how to move throughout life if you weren't, if you wasn't that devoted Christian. Um, and also a late mother from my church. Her name was Jackie Anderson. She also helped out a lot, and especially with me going through school and then also balancing a spiritual life at the same time.
Let's talk a little bit about your church. It's been a year since you first took over as youth minister at New Hampton Baptist Church. What's been the biggest takeaway from your experience so far?
The biggest takeaway I've received from working with New Hampton Baptist Church is being prepared and being ready to do things that you think you're not prepared to do, or being able to do things that you did not know that you was gonna have to do on the spot of. And that's something I struggled with when I first started, because that's something I never had to deal with, because I came from a church who had a pastor, a youth pastor, a pastor and associate pastor. Where New Hampton also, although they have an associate pastor, but he works a lot, so sometimes he miss church on Sundays. Whereas at Carlton Grove, both pastors were always there at the same time, so I never had to step in and fulfill those roles of what the pastor, the associate pastor would do. It's at New Hampton, I did those type of things here at the moment. But the takeaway would be always be prepared. Be also ready. That's the biggest thing I've taken away. And also being able to deal with conflict, not conflict in a bad way, but how being able to talk to someone and show them like this is not what so and so meant. They meant it this way, and working with conflict and getting everybody on the same page, making sure no one is feeling like they don't belong in a space.
So what are some of the most significant issues kind of within New Hampton Baptist Church that you feel need to be addressed?
The lack of youth. And that was something that we were addressing up until February. February 22nd, I believe, was our last Sunday in the church house. So COVID kind of like put a halt to that. We were working on the plan to get more youth in, but that is the biggest challenge that New Hampton is facing right now, because we have a lot of older members, and when those older members pass, if there's no youth to come behind them, the doors of New Hampton Church will be closing, and that's not something we want to see happen.
So another major issue that is commonly talked about in communities now is mental health. So how does New Hampton Baptist Church attempt to support its members that struggle with their mental and emotional health?
All right, yeah. So Pastor Robinson is good at helping people who have challenges with mental health. So that's something that he has geared himself with doing. This past year, especially, we had a lot of people in the church who lost loved ones. And I also have a 24-hour policy where I'm available around the clock, no matter what time it is. I'm able to speak to anyone who's dealing with anything. And also can't remember what month it is, but we opened up a hotline for AUC students to call in. I think it was in November. Something happened in November. I can't remember what the actual thing was that happened, but we opened up a hotline. It was also 24 hours a day. 24 hours, and we had students to call in to speak with us to get prayer, guidance on this type of stuff, or counseling.
So you spoke a little bit earlier about New Hampton looking to do more youth outreach and bring in more students. So what does New Hampton Baptist Church need to do to connect with the younger generation of believers? How can that church be relevant to young people who are exploring their faith?
All right, so everything is going on now. This is any church, but New Hampton specifically should be on the front lines of these movements, where they can be seen by people who are out here on the front lines of the race pandemic that's going on. And if we're on the front lines with them, they are face to face, knowing that New Hampton Baptist Church and them about how to lead this movement in a nonviolent Christian way, and praying that these people turn to the church after all of this is over to continue having this conversation about how we can make this world a better place for all people. And also, New Hampshire should get out into the community that they are in. There's a school house right across the street. We should be over at that school more often, doing volunteer work, helping out, reading to the kids, to get more people to come to the church. That's how we grow our. That's how we should grow our community. Start from within that community and work our way out to the Atlanta area.
So how should we as ministers and the church as a whole, New Hampton and others, respond in our ministry in light of the recent events, including the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many others, as well as with this current focus on police brutality, systemic racism, and injustice?
All right, so we should come from all things that's regarding the church and talk about and make sure it's Bible based. Anything that we do with the church should be based from the Bible, right? So we should talk about how Jesus lived his life, all people, regardless of whatever background they came from, how he dealt with conflict, and do it in the way that he did. Since we're called as Christians, we should be living Christ-like. So we can do that. Talk to people. We should also be out on the front lines, like they did in the early and late '60s, leading these nonviolent movements. People like SNCC or the SCLC, I should say, who are out here on these front lines. These churches should have these type of organizations within the church house who are always ready within a phone call away to go out into the community to support people who are dealing with racism, police brutality, and those type of things.
So sorry, go ahead.
My bad. Like, for example, the Black church back in the early, during the Reconstruction era was the focal point and the root of all organizations, majority of all organizations, such as the NAACP. They were sprouted out of the Black church. So we should still be doing that type of work today to make sure that our community is progressing forward.
So you recently helped lead a protest down in Elberton, Georgia. What compelled you to do that, and what did you take away from the experience of leading that?
All right. So I've always told people, never forget where you come from. Always go back and help. But then I looked at myself. I'm like, I'm not doing no work back home, but I'm telling people to always go back home and to do work. And when I thought of that, it was protests popping up all over these rural counties. And I was like, I'm from a small town. We haven't had a protest that I know of ever down there in Elbert County. So I can go back and lead a protest. So that was the main reason I went. And I also wanted to give the people of Elbert County an idea of what it looked like to step out and to let your voice be heard, to be a spark to a conversation that is needed down there, and not be afraid of anyone, any elected official, any appointed official, no one who thinks they're in control. Do not be afraid to speak out and call upon them to bring about change.
How do you believe that God wants Christians to think about and respond to racial justice issues? So
I believe God is looking down on us right now as Christians. I won't say yes, as Christians. Half of us are understanding what's going on, and then you have these conservative Christians who are just they're not really understanding what's going on. I won't say that they don't understand. They're not trying to understand. Like, things are changing, and the way that we grasp and bring in more Christians so that we can continue to grow out into the world is to listen to what people are saying. And if they are speaking something logical and something that's not going against the Bible and something that's not going against Christian values, then we should also join in with them and call upon action. For example, Black Lives Matter. They're not saying any other lives don't matter. What we are saying is we want the same representation that our white brothers are receiving, that our Asian brothers are receiving. We want that same treatment, and we're going to get that treatment by doing what we've been seeing in the last few days, going out into the streets. Not last few days, last few months, going out into the streets, demanding justice, demanding that our voices be heard, demanding respect for Black and brown men and women on the streets.
So, in closing, what would you say to people who are struggling with their faith in the midst of the pandemic and the current political and social climate?
So, your voice went out. You said.
I said, in closing, what would you say to people who are struggling with their faith in the midst of the pandemic and with the current political and social climate?
All right. I told myself this the other day that we are dealing with two pandemics. And that was also the title of my speech: racism and COVID-19. Both of these, I believe, are testing our faith and testing the people who say they have faith. We see the church, the doors to the church are closed. But like Pastor Sharp said, the church is still open because we are the church. So I would say to them to dig deep within yourself, stick to the reason that your purpose for being on earth, find something that you think God has called you to do, and pray on that thing, and God will give you the answer to what you're praying for. And also, I also believe I started to go off on a tangent. And all of this is, like I said earlier, it's a test, and we should just keep praying and keep asking God to show us the reason why He is doing this. And once that reason is shown, we should turn ourselves to that reason and see how can we straighten ourselves up. But all of this is a test for some bigger reason. Something big is coming behind everything that's going on right now. This race war, and this COVID-19. And I believe that people who stay faithful, people who remain steadfast, honest, and true, Mother Morehouse, will get a blessing from this, from all of this that's going on right now.
Minister Gibbs, thank you so much for your time and all that you've shared with us, and we wish you well as you endeavor in the ministry at New Hampton and beyond.
Same thing to you, brother. Thank you so much for having me on today. I pray that you and your family are staying safe during this pandemic.
Thank you. God bless.
You too.
I give you my all. I'm giving you all of me, all of me.